He was such a ball of joy. He was a really good baby. He was fun. You could tell he had a really good personality. And then for me, it was a big adjustment, just learning momhood. What is what is it like to be a mom? And you know, getting those hugs and those kisses and the oohs and goos. It was just a really fulfilling feeling. I had been noticing changes in Colton's development over a period of time after I went back to work. It wasn't initially when I went back to work, but over a few weeks after that. And there were developmental changes. They were things like his hands being fisted, his head size appeared larger to me. Very minor developmental change. Tummy time. Oh gosh, that was terrible. There were minor developmental changes that I, shared with my friends, his doctor. Everybody thought I was being a little bit dramatic, and I chalked it up to me being maybe a helicopter mom, an overprotective mom, first-time mom. So on November 12th, was a Thursday, I got home that evening. I got home later from a doctor's appointment and met Jeff and my mom at home. My mom wanted to come out and visit with us. And Colton seemed very uncomfortable. I thought it was sickness because he was warm to touch, he was sleepy, he was fussy when you did try to wake him up. He wasn't out of it, but he just wanted to sleep. So I chalked it up to being his first illness. We had only had one round of shots, so I thought we were just experiencing our first sickness. I called a friend who's a nurse, and she gave me just the standard things, warm bath, here's your Tylenol dosage, and of course if it gets worse, go to the emergency room. I also called his after hours nurse line. They said the same thing, and that's what I did. I gave him a warm bath, I treated with Tylenol, I even set my alarm every 3 hours through that evening to feed him, because I thought, well, if we're sick, then we need hydration. And he wasn't better Friday morning when we got up, so I made a doctor's appointment with his pediatrician, and that morning we went to see her, and she couldn't find anything. She knew he didn't feel well. You could tell he didn't feel well. He didn't have a fever at that moment, but she said, well, since he's just so young, let's go do blood work. And when we went down to do blood work, he was in a car carrier, and I had to have the cutest little car seat cover to go with it. And I pulled back the car seat cover, and he was doing this twitching motion with his arm. And the lady that was taking his blood looked at me and said, is that normal? I said, I don't know, is that normal? And of course she said, I'm not a medical professional. She goes, I just advise you to go back upstairs. And that's what we did. We went back up to his pediatrician. And at that point, I had called my husband Jeff to come meet me, and we went back up to the pediatrician. And when we got back in, she said, well, because of this episode, and she said, I now see that his soft spot is bulging. I'm just going to be conservative. Let's send you to the Children's Hospital. So at this point, it's 2 o'clock on November 13th, and we loaded up. We grabbed my mom, and we went to the Children's Hospital. And that's kind of where the downward slide starts. We got back rather quickly. They started the whole battery of medical assessments, blood work, urinalysis, just all your standard protocol. All of that's coming back normal. But he's actively still having these episodes, which it's been pretty determined at this point. These are seizures. They decided to do a lumbar puncture to try and take some cerebral spinal fluid, and when they did that, his cerebral spinal fluid was bloody. That's too much information, but it was bloody, and that indicated that there was internal bleeding on his brain somewhere. And then they sent us for a CT scan, and the CT scan revealed a lot of hemorrhaging on his brain. And at that point, we were sent to ICU to kind of determine where we're going from here. I remember it being a fog that Friday night. I just remember going from this room to that room to this test to that test, and they were telling me, he had blood on the brain and we're going to send you to ICU, but I don't know that it all was sinking in. And we got up to ICU late that evening, and the ICU doctor looked at Jeff and I and said, "Who hurt your child?" And that was the first time somebody had told us that that's what they were suspecting was wrong. And Jeff and I were flabbergasted. We looked at each other and said, "What do you mean, who hurt our child?" I mean, we kind of laughed just because we were shocked at what they were telling us. And I said, "He's sick, he has a fever." And he said, "I have my suspicions, but I strongly believe somebody hurt your child." So from Friday night on, we were, they started, putting him on, they did an EEG. They put him in a medically induced coma because they were trying to slow the seizures, because at this point his seizures were just back to back to back, and he was uncomfortable. Their idea of putting him in a coma was to lead us to an MRI eventually to kind of paint a better picture of what has actually happened. In the meantime, Saturday afternoon, a state police officer showed up at our hospital room, interviewed Jeff and I both, asked questions. He showed up with a regional social worker as well. They asked us the questions, what about this? What about that? Have you been in a car accident lately? Leading to the point that there was significant trauma. We didn't have the answers that they wanted, and they said, "Well, I think we're going to pass this off to our detective. We think this might need a little more attention." So sometime Sunday, maybe into Monday, another social worker and a detective with the state police department showed up in our room, and along with a forensic pediatrician, which I did not know existed. I am certainly glad that there's a field for that, because it's in our society. But and they interviewed us. They interviewed Jeff and I again. They interviewed my parents. They interviewed his parents, his sister, because we're just the ones that were with him the most often. And we didn't have we just the same. They asked questions about Jeff as a parent. They asked questions about me, because they interviewed us separately. And at the end of that day, the social worker made the call, just out of precaution, that we were no longer allowed to be alone with Colton, which really stinks. We certainly respected the process, because we knew that there had to be a plan. Moving into the next week, Colton went for an MRI, again to paint the picture of what happened. And when the MRI results came in, they set us down for a meeting, and you're talking a meeting with 2 or 3 ICU doctors, their nurse practitioners, the nurses, the social worker, the forensic pediatrician, and they said, "This isn't the first time your child had been abused." And we just, where did we fail? Where did we go wrong? How did we miss this mark so badly? They just said it was old blood, new blood on top of old blood. He also had retinal hemorrhaging in his eyes. None of his injuries were physical injuries. They were not present to the naked eye. Also out of caution, because our child was also part of with a child care provider. They interviewed the child care provider and any family that had used that child care provider. And they're our friends. Our friends were encouraged to come to the hospital that night also and get evaluated. And when they evaluated their child had 2 breaks in her leg. One dating, I think at the time, 3 weeks old, and one was 5 weeks old. And that sort of gave the picture of this injury didn't happen by these people. It happened in the child care provider's care. From there, our attention turned to Colton. We couldn't worry about all of that. So we spent the next week trying to navigate just the medical life. We were told Colton would be mechanically dependent, that he would be on a trach, a feeding tube, and that's if he even made it. They asked us about DNRs for our 4-month-old. I just can't even wrap my brain around that. They prepared us. They prepared us for the worst. Colton then started breathing on his own, which was, they told us not to get too excited about that. After about a week and a half, 2 weeks, they were able to remove his breathing tube. And the ICU doctor said, if you told me 3 days ago we would be able to remove this tube, I would have told you were crazy. And he started breathing on his own. The next step was to get him to eat on his own. So over the course of another weekend, we worked with him on a passy, dipping his passy in sugar water. And he started to take his passy, and that was a good indication that he would begin to suck a bottle. And he did. He sucked a bottle, and we were able to remove his feeding tube. And so we were able to come home after 3 weeks of being in the hospital, but our life didn't stop there. We started a whole life of medical world after that. You know, he had countless seizures still a day. We're in therapies a day. It was definitely a life to navigate. Probably the day we left the hospital, I guess it was a wake-up call that I'm not going to have a nurse here to help me. I have to do this on my own. So I'd say that would be the day that it was like, oh, this is real. This is real life. And it was, those first 3 months coming home after that were scary, because we felt every move we would make wasn't going to be the right one. And I think still to this day we question some of the decisions we have put in front of us. I was really scared that this was going to wear us down as parents. I worried about my relationship, that this would wear us down as parents. My relationship with Jeff, how is this going to strain that? How is this going to, is he going to be able to have the relationships with friends? Is he going to be able to ever stay the night with his grandparents? The things that we got as children, I so wondered. I didn't even set myself up for an expectation because I didn't want to be disappointed. And I'm pleased that's not our life. He gets to live a pretty fulfilling life. He gets to have his buddies, and he gets to have his grandparents, and he loves to play the piano. He loves Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, and he loves super simple songs on YouTube. Colton is not the child they predicted he would be. He is a super vivacious 7-year-old. I like to say he's a force to be reckoned with. He's a wild man. He's a wild man. The school wrote on his note just the other day, he was hyper today. And they meant it in a very positive way. He was in a good mood. He was loving. He was having a good time. So he's definitely a chatty Cathy. The biggest thing I would want families to take away is advocate for your child. If you feel in your gut that something isn't right, it's okay to have open, honest conversations. I feel like if I maybe had addressed and had more of an open, honest conversation instead of trying to be nice or play nice, maybe we could have done some prevention. But even preventing from the beginning, when you're enrolling a child into a child care facility, or even a family member, even if it is a family member, having that conversation. Hey, this is a thing. If you're feeling upset, if you're feeling overwhelmed, it's okay to set my child down in a safe space and go get a drink of water. And, go step outside for just a moment and grab just a breath of fresh air. As long as my child's safe, it is okay that you have to take care of yourself, because if we're not caring for ourselves, our kids aren't going to be cared for. Because I want to make sure that Colton's story does do the impact. I don't want somebody to go through the nightmare that we have lived through.